Hi, it's Dwyer. It's November 21st, 2024. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let me give a recommendation to start this video. There is a great piece. It's on BoxingScene.com. They talk about John Duddy, a former prospect who was highly regarded. He fought Julio Cesar Chavez, went the distance with him, which back then was an accomplishment. He was scheduled to fight Andy Lee, who was a big-time prospect himself back then, and Duddy decided to walk away from the sport. He had a great record. He only had 2 losses. He had a vibrant fan base, but he was tired of making the sacrifices that need to be made to be a professional fighter. He was tired of waking up alone in his own bed, right? You're young. You understand that you only have so long to participate with your generation, right? Pretty soon, many of them are going to move to the suburbs. Many of them are going to start having kids. You know, the club's going to be empty. You're going to be in the club. The folks are going to be younger than you. It's going to be a different world, different tastes, different generation. So he wanted out, and he was in a room one day. This is my interpretation of the article. And he was around, we'll call them some suits. And they were telling him, look, we made you. Right? He was being treated like chattel, property. And he decided, this is not for me. So he's still in the game. He trained some people. He still lives in New York City or close to it. He gave an interview to Boxing Scene. It's a must-read if you're into the boxing lifestyle. The interaction between the athletes and the suits, right? How a fighter feels when the dream leaves, right? You've lost a couple of matches. You're no longer unbeaten. And you're being offered big fights. You have to weigh the possibility of getting physically hurt with, the odds that you'll win the fight. It's all there in that piece. I encourage people to give it a look. Again, it's on John Duddy, D-U-D-D-Y. It's at BoxingScene.com. Let's talk about a prospect. He looked bulletproof until his last fight when he got dropped. He got off the canvas, he finished the guy, but let's just say, apart from getting dropped, he looked like he had some defensive lapses. Now, I believe he has a bright future. His name is Abdullah Mason. You need to make a note of that name. But let's talk about the situation. Folks, he needs to tighten up his defense. The problem with boxing is that if you're a big puncher and you're a young guy and you're knocking everyone out, no one can handle your combination of power and hand speed. Sometimes these young guys who are in the limelight for the first time in their careers, sometimes they lose focus and don't realize that they can't just fight for the now. They can't just fight to be big man on campus, because sooner or later people graduate. What Abdullah Mason has to do is to actually think about the future. He needs to realize, I'm knocking all of these guys out, but my level of competition is going to keep improving. I need to think about not now, but 2 years from now. I need to work on my defense. His defense is not there. It was striking because he has a lot of family in his corner, and after the fight, an older gentleman from his corner was saying, hey, he's the prospect of the year and stuff like that. Don't fall in love with prospect of the year talk. right? If I'm Mason, I'm interested in being a world champion, not the prospect of 2024. Maybe that gets you more money from promoters. Maybe that gets you more fight invitations. The bottom line, though, is when you're a guy like this who has a lot of talent, who certainly has the offensive game, Mason is offensively blessed, you need to then do the hard work of looking at the Canelos to figure out the defensive side of the equation. Right? You also need to figure out survival skills. Here he gets hurt in this fight, doesn't know how to clinch, just has no clue on how to survive when hurt because he had never been hurt in a boxing match. Right? You need to get over that, and you need to realize that your assumption should be that you are going to get hurt. Right? You know, we talk about the math. Understand, even with 4 champions in a weight class in many divisions, what that means is you have to be in the top 4 globally to be a champion. Right? Boxing's unforgiving. You know, I can play in the NBA. I don't have to be LeBron James or Michael Jordan. I can make millions of dollars just being a starter who can give a team a good 30 minutes a night. Right? In boxing, if you want to be champion, you need to realize you need to be LeBron James or Michael Jordan. Right? You need to be the best or awfully close to the best in your weight class to get that belt. You're not going to get it with the level of defense that Abdullah Mason has right now, right? In boxing, you have a structural problem too. Everyone wants to praise prospects. No one wants to criticize them. Why? Because they're the future cash cows of the sport. Everyone wants to get paid, right? Mason needs to get past the noise, have a serious conversation with his trainer, and say, look, I need to work on my defense. He needs to prioritize that right now. It's not all about wins. It's about skills. He needs to spend time in the gym. He needs to look at the tape of this fight and ask himself how he got hit so flush by a puncher more than once. Let's shift gears. Great article on badlefthook.com. It's a great article. Right, speaking of Canelo, Robert Garcia, one of the best trainers in the sport, gives his opinion on the best Mexican boxer in history. Right, he compares 2 guys, and I disagree with him. Let's talk about it. To Garcia, the top 2 names are Canelo and Julio Cesar Chavez. Right? Garcia admits, he readily admits, that the public is with Chavez. Now, I suspect that's going to change as people get older. Right? But the public believes that Julio Cesar Chavez is the best Mexican fighter in history. And Garcia points out that Canelo doesn't get knocked down. Canelo hasn't been cut in a fight. Right? He points out that just the fact that Canelo hasn't had some of these blood and guts fights that Chavez had should tell you that Canelo is the better fighter. Right? Canelo is scientific. Simply put, in my words, Canelo's defensively blessed. Right? Canelo is a better defensive fighter than Julio Cesar Chavez. So you have Robert Garcia basically saying, look, don't just look at the offensive highlights of Canelo. Look at his defense. Look at how he's able to keep himself out of harm's way. That's the difference between the 2 fighters. Now, let me disagree with Robert Garcia, who I have a lot of respect for. Right? The question, the way it's framed, led to the wrong conclusion. What I want to do is to invite people. You have the films here on YouTube. Invite people to explore the career of a Hall of Famer. Folks, he's in the Hall of Fame. Who died at 23 years old. 23. Right? Who was still in the, we'll call it young Ali part of his career. He has legs that neither Canelo nor Julio Cesar Chavez had. He's a risk taker. I'll agree he was a bit reckless. Anybody who voluntarily hangs by the ropes against Wilfredo Gomez, big-time knockout puncher, Hall of Famer, is either crazy or is a major risk taker. Right? And the guy pulled it off. From the ropes, he knocks down Wilfredo Gomez. Right? To me, he's one of the best fighters I've ever seen, but I concede. He dies at 23 in a car crash. Right? So all we have is the Ali in the 60s part of his career. Right? When he's young, everything works. He has fast hands. He has great legs. He has power. Right? In a short career, he's beating Hall of Famers like Wilfredo Gomez, like Azuma Nelson. The fighter I'm talking about is one of Roy Jones's favorite fighters, Salvador Sanchez. Right, folks? Let's just say this guy's one of the absolute best fighters I've ever seen. Right? I'll concede. When he fought Azuma Nelson, he was the big name. Azuma Nelson was the young, untested fighter. But we now know Azuma Nelson was a Hall of Famer. Right? I'll agree, when a guy's 23, he hasn't really faced the adversity that cagey vets who have been in the sport for years end up facing. Right? But to me, the difference between him and Chavez and Canelo is that this guy was a supreme athlete. Right? This is the guy who took Danny Little Red Lopez's title. Right? We saw Canelo against Caleb Plant, and Caleb Plant had better legs than him. Right? Canelo had a hard time cutting off the ring on Caleb Plant for several rounds in that fight. Canelo catches up with him later, gets the stoppage. But understand, Caleb Plant has his moments. Just like, by the way, Plant had his moments against Benavidez. Let's give Plant credit on the level of his opposition. Well, the difference to me between Canelo and Salvador Sanchez is Salvador Sanchez could move with Caleb Plant. Salvador Sanchez, different time, everyone was up on their toes, right? Sticking and moving was a fad in boxing back then. Well, Sanchez could stick and move. He also had the kind of skills where he could be with his back up against the ropes against one of the dominant sluggers of that era in Wilfredo Gomez. I would say the answer to the question of who's the best Mexican boxer in history, Canelo or Chavez, for me the answer is Sanchez. Right? Give him a look. I invite the boxing cognoscenti to revisit that career. The car crash that killed Sanchez is one of the biggest tragedies in boxing in my lifetime. Finally, let's shift gears. The middleweights. Right now, I'm too old to, engage in amusement park thinking. Right? Let's just keep it real. I mentioned this to you earlier when these two fighters were trying to come up with a purse bid. You have a Marvin Hagler figure at 160 pounds. He's a dominant champion. Dominant. His name is Janibek. Like Hagler, somehow he's flown under the radar. Right? Hagler early in his career was not loved. We didn't consider Hagler to be Ray Leonard or Thomas the Hitman Hearns or Roberto Duran. Right? Of course, Hagler would go on to fight all three of them. Well, Janibek is the man at 160 pounds. I think he's dominant. Now, he's a southpaw. He's a real southpaw. Hamza Sheeraz is fighting as an orthodox fighter, but believe it or not, he's a southpaw. He's like William Zepeda. His real hand is his jab hand. Now, we're in an era where you have a lot of champions, right? We've been in this era for decades, right? You have a lot of champions. Janibek is not undisputed. So, of course, these guys were going through the charade of negotiating. I believe fighters do this for PR, right? They're going through the charade of negotiating, recognizing that these might be the two biggest talents at 160 pounds. Also recognizing that the fight would really be an existential type fight. If I were in the Sheeraz corner, I would be asking the question of, gee, how do we cope with the fact that Janibek might be able to neutralize our guy's dominant left hand with his Rocky Marciano type lean, right? Janibek would no doubt come in on a side angle and could lean away from that right hand, right? He could put his hand on the side of his head. How would we defend against Janibek's straight left when it's coming in on the non-dominant side of our fighter? Right? I believe the Sheeraz people understood the risk involved. Understand, Sheeraz, in my opinion, is one of the best talents in any weight class in the entire sport. Right? I believe if Sheeraz gains weight, he's a major threat at 168. I privately believe, and I don't mean to diss Canelo. Canelo is first ballot Hall of Famer. He's done it. He's a great. He's one of the all-time greats. But I believe, based on styles, and I've been saying this here for a while, believe it or not, online, that Sheeraz beats Canelo. Right? Canelo is still hanging around at 168. Sheeraz wants to keep himself in the running for fighting a Canelo. So, of course, in a world where you're a big-time talent, people know you're a big-time talent at 160 pounds, and there's more than one champion, Sheeraz has pivoted away from fighting Janibek toward fighting Carlos Adames. Right? Let me just say, fight fans need to understand that most divisions, not 168, not, the division Inoue's in, but most divisions have multiple champions. Right? Big-time talents don't have to fight the best champion in the division to have a shot at a title. Also, boxing is not all about titles. If there's an all-time great out there, if there's a Canelo out there, and you're a young guy, you're on the way up, you want to make a name for yourself, you want a legacy, that's the fight you want, regardless of the other champions who are out there. You're not going to jeopardize that fight. Fighting a guy who's great, but who no one knows about. And that's who Janibek is. Right? So Sheeraz is taking the easier road. Understand, there would have been a lot of math involved. A lot of it. In a fight between an inverted southpaw and a southpaw fighting as southpaw. Maybe we'll get that Janibek Hamza Sheeraz fight down the road. But now was not the right time. Let me also say, too, that the plot thickens. You have Denzel Bentley, and an argument can be made that it's Denzel Bentley who gave Janibek his toughest fight. Right? Because Bentley is fluid. Bentley is a guy who can linger around the pocket, keep you working, while protecting himself and moving. Right? Well, he's fighting Brad Pauls. Folks, that's a big fight. The winner of that fight likely is going to become the WBO mandatory to fight Janibek. Now, you might have some gamesmanship there, too. If I'm Denzel Bentley, I've already fought Janibek. I already know how bad that could be. Right? You know, do I want to fight Janibek again? Or do I want to linger and fight somebody else? Right? I'm guessing Denzel Bentley would rather fight Hamza Sheeraz than fight Janibek again. Let me also say, too, it's November 21st, 2024. All eyes are on who Canelo picks for his Cinco de Mayo fight next year in Vegas. Right? I would not be surprised if the person he picks is Chris Eubank. Right now, Eubank, one of boxing's most fascinating people. Right? Eubank is not about the belts. Eubank is about the money. Right? Eubank, Eubank sees all these young guys. He's not even interested in being the king of England. Right? He's the guy who realizes that he's on Canelo's radar. And he also realizes that in terms of legacy, right, people aren't going to remember him fighting other guys, no matter how good they are, as much as they'll remember him fighting Canelo. Now, Canelo holds all the cards, right, all of them. He decides who he fights in Las Vegas next year, right? I wouldn't be surprised if he sidesteps Janibek, who wants to fight him, Sheeraz, who wants to fight him, to fight Chris Eubank, in part because Eubank's older, and if you're going to fight Eubank, it better be now. Right? So let's pay close attention to what's happening at 168 and 160. Just understand 160 is interesting. Understand, too, that some of the guys at 154 are showing flaws. Right, folks? Boachuk knocked down Virgil Ortiz multiple times when they fought. Right? Multiple times. Sebastian Fundora had Tim Tszyu bleeding from his head, having problems with the blood flowing into his eyes, and still couldn't stop Tim Tszyu, who then, of course, fought the number one contender for several years, who Jermell Charlo was steadfastly avoiding, and Tim Tszyu himself got stopped. So, and of course, Erickson Lubin got disfigured by Sebastian Fundora when they fought. Right, so guys at 160, I believe Sheeraz is going to have no choice but to go up to 168 because he's just too big for the weight class. Understand, Janibek himself had a problem making weight for a recent fight. Right, it had to be postponed. The fight ended up getting moved to Australia. At least that's what they tell us. Right, in reality, who knows what the truth is? The truth might involve slow ticket sales, the need for an excuse to postpone and move an event to a fan-friendly venue. Right? Mikhailovich was from Australia. Right? Well, let's just say if you're at 160 and if you don't win the Canelo sweepstakes, in other words, you don't have that big payday fight, the guy at 168 realizes that the water is deep at 160. The question's going to become, how long can Sebastian Fundora, who's 6'5", stay at 154? Right? Even the new champion is a bit big. Are these guys going to come up in weight to 160? And is Janibek going to have the opportunity that Marvin Hagler had when, of course, Thomas the Hitman Hearns got too big, came up to 160? It gave Hagler the opportunity to fight a big name. Right? Roberto Duran decided he wanted dessert. He ends up going up to 160. That gave Marvin Hagler a chance to fight him. Is Janibek going to get those opportunities? Is he going to linger at 160 because he sees the guys at 154? He sees the flaws. How long is Virgil Ortiz going to stay at 154? right? We'll find out in the coming months. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. If you have a John Duddy story, if you have thoughts on Abdullah Mason, if you have thoughts on who's the best Mexican boxer in history, and you want to offer a name other than the names we've mentioned, Canelo, Chavez, Sanchez, right? If you have somebody else in mind, or if you want to talk about one of those three, tell us about it in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.